we had a lot of questions. We just talked earlier before, during the lunch break. But interested to know the U.S. Government's role in helping Ukraine to build its military. As you know, Ukraine had no defense before, basically no defense before, budget before the Russian war, and it's had to rebuild its military from scratch. And it has to learn a lot of hard lessons there, such as civilian control of the military, such as how to budget in a way that protects state secrets but also allows transparency, which is something that Ukraine has not, the balance hasn't been found yet, as we continually find scandals emerging in corruption involving procurement. And also, there's been a lot of mistakes in war, and even big questions about what is the culpability, what is a prosecutable offense for the military, and who should decide. So you can attack any of those or your own questions, and I'll turn the microphone over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks to Oksana for the privilege to be on this, to participate in this forum, and I understand this is the first Lviv Security Forum, and I look forward to seeing one every year. We're obviously off to a great start in a great city, so thanks for the privilege to be a part of it. What I'd like to do is take a few minutes and address three main sort of topics, and then I'll look forward to any challenges or questions, or you can go wherever you're interested. The first one, of course, is to reaffirm the commitment of the United States, along with our allies, Canada, Lithuania, Poland, UK, to help Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression. So I'll touch on that. Secondly, as I looked at the questions for this panel, one of them was about, are we serious, are we taking war seriously, particularly when you talk about hybrid war or the Gerasimov doctrine, what are the implications? And so I'll talk briefly about that. And then the third sort of category that I will address briefly and look forward to questions is on the relationship between the military, the state, the people. What are the implications for legal status? What does it mean to be a soldier? With the correct legal protections to do your duty. But also there are broader policies that if you don't get the policy right, it makes it difficult for the soldier to do his duty. So those would kind of be the three categories. First, I think it should be very apparent to everybody that the United States is committed, has been committed to Ukraine now for several years. Today, we have 250 American soldiers that are at the Yavoriv Training Center, just an hour from here. I was here last week to see them. It was a transition for a new group, so this is continuing. The United States has provided supplies now for 3 years, counter-fire radar, medical supplies and medical training, equipment. We just delivered, I think, 35 ambulances that just arrived. I have personally visited 4 different military hospitals in Kyiv, Dnipro, Mariupol, and Kharkiv. And I saw terrific medical professionals and wounded Ukrainian soldiers in each of those facilities, but I saw the full range of high quality, low quality facilities. So we're committed to continuing to help develop Ukrainian military healthcare as well. We have benefited also from our interaction with Ukrainian soldiers. While you mentioned that Ukraine had to rebuild its military from scratch, what Ukraine has always had is terrific young men and young women who are tough, they're very smart, and they are great fighters. And they are committed to the defense of their country. And what I have learned I've never been on the receiving end of Russian artillery fire. I have never received Russian rocket fire. I have never been on the receiving end of Russian electronic warfare. But all of these Ukrainian soldiers and commanders have. And so we have learned a lot from our Ukrainian partners. And now all the lessons that we've learned from them are part of our training center at Hohenfels and at the 2 training centers in the United States. We've incorporated everything that we've learned about Russia from Ukraine. And I've also discovered that Ukrainian soldiers are technically extremely competent and professional. The radar that we provided, it turns out it's even better than we realized. When you give it to a Ukrainian soldier who is receiving Russian artillery fire and rocket fire, you get motivated. And that radar is even better than I knew it was. So we've learned there as well. Of course, the Russians know how good it is, and they immediately came after that radar. They destroyed one, but not the rest of them. So commitment to the United States, the amount of money, the amount of people, and when the United States is serious about something, we put money on it and we put people on it. And that's happening right here in western Ukraine. Our ambassador, Yovanovich, of course, is very active, as was her predecessor, Ambassador Pyatt, and now, of course, the special envoy, Ambassador Volker, working very hard to keep Russia, to hold them accountable for implementation of the Minsk agreement. And as long as this continues, the United States, you can be sure the United States Army will continue here. And finally, we are working very hard at Yavoriv to help develop the Ukrainian Army's training center there. I've been amazed at the progress that's been made over the past year. And I know that General Moshenko and also General Popov have worked very hard to provide resources for that training center to improve its capability. And I would anticipate that we will branch out and help in other training centers around Ukraine. But I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. One last thing, the lethality of the battlefield. When you talk about taking war seriously, when I look at all the Ukrainian vehicles, the Russian vehicles, the Russian separatists, Russian-led separatist vehicles, they are covered with what we call reactive armor. This is something that provides additional protection to the steel of the tank. And then yet you still see vehicles completely destroyed by Russian artillery, Russian rockets, and Russian tanks. So a reminder of the lethality of the battlefield. And with Russian UAVs, a lot, and Russian ability to intercept the communications, we have all had to get serious again about camouflage, about dispersion, about using secure communications to avoid being targeted. Because the Russians clearly have the ability to combine UAVs, radio intercept, and rockets very, very quickly. So we've learned that watching Ukrainian soldiers. So that was the first sort of topic. The second topic, when you talk about taking war seriously, all of us in the West are having to make an adjustment because of what we've seen Russia doing. We've had to adjust our posture. I was a brigade commander in the first year of the war in Iraq, from 2003 to 2004, and for the next 14 years, all of us have been fighting counterinsurgency, stability operations, living on a FOB, a forward operating base, very, very concerned about civilian casualties. Our intelligence was focused on intercepting cell phones, worried about IEDs. It was a different kind of fight. Now, as we watch Russia's aggression, what they've done in Georgia, and of course there's still 10,000 Russian soldiers occupying 20% of the Republic of Georgia, and Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Watching what they've done when they invaded Crimea, watching what they've done when they went into Donbass, watching their exercises, watching what they've demonstrated in Syria, we obviously are paying close attention to that, and we're having to adjust or to relearn how to conduct large-scale maneuver warfare with artillery, aircraft, armor, infantry, engineers, all of the combat arms. So we've had to change that as well as modernize our equipment as well. But what I was slow to realize is that we had to change the policies too, the legal status. When you're on a NATO mission, ISAF, for example, in Afghanistan, you operate with a certain number of type of rules of engagement. Most of the countries in the West have signed agreements about the use of landmines, or to limit the use of scatterable munitions, for good reason. The Russians are not bothered about the use of landmines. They're happy to use every munition that they can to cause as much damage as they can. So we are all having to adjust and look at our policies about precision weapons, or if you're in a fight that has thousands of artillery rounds being fired back and forth, that's completely different from if you're shooting one round at one Taliban on a motorcycle. It's a completely different environment for permissions and speed, and of course the estimates, the risks that you take to collateral damage. So getting the policy right there. How do you handle prisoners of war? In Afghanistan, some people are reluctant to use biometric data because they worry that maybe a Canadian citizen who's also an Afghan, that his biometric data could end up in a U.S. database. That's a normal concern. If you're fighting in a large-scale conventional war where you're going to have thousands of prisoners or hundreds of prisoners, do you have the procedures correct for that? It's completely different. So we have to address that policy. If you are fighting in the sovereign nation, for example, if we were in Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania or Poland, these are NATO allies, sovereign countries, and if we were fighting inside one of those countries against a Russian attack, the policies would have to address how do we do that. That's completely different than fighting in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, for example. So are we taking that seriously? Absolutely. All of these policies are under review. And then finally, ammunition. The amount of ammunition and the types of ammunition that we would need if we had to fight against a Russian attack of some sort, so significantly greater than the ammunition that we are using in Afghanistan, for example, particularly precision munitions or long-range rockets. So getting the industrial base ready for that is also part of it. And of course, you know the North Koreans just fired another missile here in the last 48 hours, and so we're having to prepare for that, a possibility of that as well. And then finally, the third category that I wanted to address briefly is the relationship between the military, the state, the population. The United States has a tradition, because of our experience as former British colonies. The United States, the Americans did not want a large standing army, but whatever army we were going to have had to be under total control of the elected civilian officials. So the president is the commander-in-chief, but the Congress has responsibilities. And I always keep a copy of the United States Constitution with me. I worked 3 times in what we call the Office of Congressional Liaison for the United States Army. My job was to help answer questions from the Congress or to explain to the Congress our budget requirements or the rules, the regulations, modernization, and so on. It was not always fun, but I knew it was always essential. And in fact, when I became an officer, a brand new officer, about 100 years ago, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, which enshrines civilian control of the military. And in fact, this is not a coincidence. It's a very small document, but the very first article of the Constitution, of course, focuses on the Congress, the legislative branch of the government. And then the second article goes to the executive, the president. And Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, where it lays out the powers of the Congress. Now, by the way, I did this years ago. I didn't do this for our host. The Congress shall have the power to raise and support armies, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrection and to repel invasion, and to provide for, this is where the Congress is given not just the power but the responsibility, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. So, all of those things I just described, that's the responsibility and the authority of the Congress. And then, of course, Article 2 says, the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and the militia of the several states. So there's a tradition of civilian control, civilian responsibility over the military, and that helps, but also that means the Congress has to fulfill its duty to provide enough resources, to pay attention to make sure that soldiers are properly trained, have the right equipment, have the right place to live, and that their families are cared for, and that there's a medical system that not only helps them recover from being wounded, but also rehabilitation. One last piece of this connection between the population and the military. During the Vietnam War, the Army went to Vietnam. The United States did not go to Vietnam. The Army, which was a conscript army, was sent to Vietnam. And the chief of the Army, at the end of the war, said, we're never doing that again. So he took most of our logistics, most of our engineers, most of the military police, most of everything that's required for long-term, sustained land operations for a war, not a 3-month, but for a war, and put it into the reserve component, to what we call our National Guard, which is different from the Ukrainian National Guard, and in the reserve. And that meant, when he did that, that meant that no president could send the Army without the Congress in every community knowing about it. So it made sure that there was a connection between the population and the military, that it was not a separate, standalone force that was a tool of any executive. So I will hold there and look forward to